Curse of Strahd is one of Dungeons & Dragons' most iconic modules. However, it's definitely one of the hardest to run as well, or at least to run correctly, especially if you're a new DM. Today we're going to go through a breakdown on why you might not want to run it as your first campaign, even though it is very tempting. Quick disclaimer before we begin: if you're a player who thinks that you or someone else in your party is going to run Curse of Strahd, just be aware that this does have some spoilers in it. So if you're worried about that, or perhaps you are going to play in somebody else's Curse of Strahd game coming up, I would go ahead and skip. Otherwise, let's get started. My first point here today is that it is insanely complicated. It is not a beginner-friendly game at all. And there's a couple reasons for that. Number one, it has a lot of open world storytelling. All of these different chapters that you have here, chapters 1 through chapter 15, are not in a linear order. These are just places that the players can visit. On top of that, there are so many maps, right? So many maps in here that you're going to have to juggle between. On top of open world storytelling, it's also going to have a whole lot of sandbox exploration. Right? These maps, right, they are wonderful. They are amazing maps. This one here is the gigantic map of Barovia. It can be a hex crawl if you want it to. It's already outlined in hexes, or you can just have it sort of be a like a visual map like these ones down here. But regardless, this has a lot of exploration that is potentially going to kind of stump some of your players, and it's going to involve you having to sort of be able to role play on the fly. On top of that, you also have these big themes of horror. With horror and tone control comes a need for good DM experience. The best horror games are ones that have the perfect timing. And that's very hard to do, especially if this is your first game. You've seen horror movies, maybe even you've played in a horror game before, like a Dungeons & Dragons or other alternate role-playing game, and you want to sort of incorporate some of the stuff you've seen in movies, some of the stuff from other games, and maybe even video games as well, all right? There's a lot of good horror video games. And try to combine all that at once. But the problem is you can make things scary, but that doesn't necessarily mean that your players are going to feel a sense of fear or dread or regret. And it is imperative that your players get that sense of fear and dread in a game like Curse of Strahd. I mean, it's one of the only games put on by Wizards of the Coast, or even going back further with the original Ravenloft setting. It's one of the only settings that is innately designed to be spooky, scary, and have, you know, the horror aspects of a game like this. And with managing horror comes managing the tone of the game. You have to be able to manage the tone of the game by using good improvisation skills and trying to help sort of pace the game along to where the players aren't rushing into things that would, you know, easily kill them. And then at the same time, you don't want them to wait too long to start doing something, because then they'll just easily be able to kill it. And you have to strike that kind of balance between the two, and that's what makes it incredibly tricky to do. Now, yes, this is kind of a sandbox game, but also at the same time, you're also going to sort of do a little bit of guiding the players, right? You don't want to railroad them into doing one thing, but at the same time, you don't want them to just freely go wherever they want, or else they could get TPK'd, and, you know, that's the end of the story. With an NPC block filled with this much information for Strahd in combat, he takes up an entire full page of this game book. He is a very complicated villain, both in combat, but also outside of combat. Strahd, to the players, isn't necessarily going to do anything outright evil, or at least he probably won't. In reality, he's kind of just going to be toying with the players, as they are just new people that wandered into his land of Barovia, and he's going to sort of tinker with them and send them on these little adventures and be watching them always. Strahd has crows, he has ravens, he has, you know, people that see what the players are doing, and then they respond back to Strahd. So every move the player makes, essentially, Strahd's going to know about it. And with that sort of looming over the background of the players, that means that he kind of is the tongue of the DM in a way. He sees everything that the players do. They can't ever really hide from him. And so he is omniscient, just as the DM is as well. And it's really tricky to be able to play that without feeling like you're using too much DM influence with your main bad guy. The best suggestion I have is to play Strahd like a chess master. He's constantly moving behind the scenes. But if you're not confident running NPCs or very long form villains, Strahd is going to end up feeling flat or just too passive. He has to be there and the players have to feel his presence. But at the same time, they want to feel like, they can at least do something that's going to help further the plot, because at the end of the day, they know they need to kill Strahd, right? That's their whole goal as players, most likely. And so they need to be able to feel like they can progress without just being able to get nowhere because Strahd just pops up and kills them. And that's a really, really difficult thing to do, especially for a new DM who has maybe never really run a long-form villain before. It's also very grim, and that is something that can be very difficult for a newer dungeon master to really master. Now, the dark and sort of brooding tone of Barovia is wonderful. It's amazing, it's fantastic, and it's rich, and that is why we play Curse of Strahd. That is the number one reason why people love it. But that means that you're going to have less moments of comic relief, which is something that, especially these days, everybody wants in D&D. So you're not really going to have a lot of comic relief. You also may have players that kind of feel helpless, like their actions maybe don't really do anything. And so there are a few places, like the Abbey of St. Markovia here, where there's a little bit of hope for the land until they start delving a little deeper and realize, yeah, this isn't really going to solve anything, and Strahd's still here, and we're all kind of screwed. And so with that, combining with the lack of comic relief means that your players are really going to have some expectations set on session 0. Before you start the game, let them know that, hey, this is not going to be a happy-go-lucky, there's not going to be shops everywhere where you can just purchase whatever you want. There's not going to be a bunch of NPCs giving out side quests. You're not going to be slaying the troll, saving the town. It's depressing, it's dark, and it might feel like you're not really making any progress, and that makes it really easy to get burnt out on. So your players have to be aware of that, but also you as the dungeon master have to be aware on how to manage that best. And lastly here, this game requires an insane amount of prep. In my own copy that I've used to run the game, I have all of these different tabs, and each one is labeled different sections, different things that might be useful or might be needed. But then on top of that, I also have, spread across the book, little sticky notes just pasted in that explain, what I would like to add, what I would like to say. Right back here, I've got all these stuck into the pages to add extra information about what all is happening. I had to read this book cover to cover 2 to 3 times before I felt confident enough to run it myself. Now, that's me. Somebody might be able to flip through the pages and say, yeah, I got this. But the thing about this world is it's rich and it is deep, and if you don't have a good understanding of each major NPC's motivations, if you don't have a good understanding of the geography and the flow of the game, and then lastly, you don't have a good understanding of player choice and the consequences thereof, it's not going to be the same, right? You might run Curse of Strahd, but did your players really feel like they were in Barovia? Did they feel like they were in the game that is, fabled as one of the best ever put out in the history of Dungeons and Dragons? You don't want them to feel like they got robbed of that. And what is even more difficult is it's very hard to play this game a second time. So if the first time you play this game, it doesn't go great, it's not the end of the world. Right? You can always play it again with somebody else dungeon mastering, somebody else running it, but it's just not the same once you've seen it. There's so many things that are not jump scares necessarily, but things that you see it once and you go, wow, that's cool, that's crazy, I love that. But then if you see it a second time, okay, not so spooky, not so scary, and every subsequent time after that, it's not the same. As somebody who's run the game before, I absolutely would say I would totally love to run it again. As a dungeon master, I find it extremely fun, but it required a lot of prep, weeks and weeks of prep, on my end, and I have a journal as well where I've got over 20 or 30 pages of information, lore, stat blocks, all sorts of stuff that I've pulled out of the book and put into that journal for me to use while I was running the game. Now, all this to say, if you are a first-time DM and maybe you've run like Lost Mines of Found Delver or something else from like a starter set, Keep on the Borderlands or whatever, and this wants to be your second ever campaign, you totally can do it. I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm just saying there are better options out there. Lost Mines of Phandelver, like I said, is a really good first-time DM story. It's very concise. It's stuck in one location. It's a great place to start. Also, Keep on the Borderlands. Again, another fantastic place. It was one of the original places that Dungeons & Dragons had a starting point on for first-time DMs, and you can find 5th edition versions of it, or you can custom brew your own from the original. Dragon of Icespire Peak is another really good one. It comes in the starter set, I think, which was sold at Target and then online retailers as well. And that's a really good one as well, because the players are going up to this mountain, and it's simple, easy to run. And finally, I would just like to say it's not impossible for a first-time DM to run it. In fact, I've seen people online who said that they did run Curse of Strahd for their very first campaign, and it was successful. They loved it. But there's a few things that they had that separated them out from most other first-time Dungeon Masters. I would say if you're dead set on running this for your first campaign, I would make sure that you have experienced players. If they've played the game before, they will be more understanding and kind of maybe even help you help yourself. So make sure you have experienced players. Number 2, I would say give yourself extra prep time. Maybe don't run it every single week. Maybe run it every 2 weeks or once a month. And maybe you already get together only once a month, and hey, it gives you those extra times, those extra weeks to prep, plan, and everything like that. But again, you never know where your players are going to go. You can lead them in a certain direction, but that doesn't mean that they go that direction. So only preparing a little module at a time can be a good way to sort of get it at little chunks rather than trying to digest the whole book at once. But there could be some danger in that. And lastly, I would say make sure you've at least read all the rules. The first few chapters of this are great at explaining everything you need to know for Barovia, and then all the locations are set as their own separate chapters in here. So just make sure you've glanced over all those original, simple, basic rules at the start to sort of make sure that you start the game off on the right foot. Also, I would suggest trying the Murder House. Right? The Murder House is an online free Session 0 or Session 1 supplement that's designed to get your players. I think it can get them up to level 3 if you want them to start off at level 3, which a lot of people say is a good starting point in Curse of Strahd. So Death House or Murder House, that would be a fantastic sort of one-shot to run. It's all located inside of a mansion. It's super fun, and it kind of sets the tone for the game, but it's kind of a little bit pulpy horror as well. Like an 80s horror movie, which kind of makes it fun. And so that can be a good way to judge how your players are reacting to these sorts of things and how you might react to, other things like that. But all in all, I would say spooky campaigns, totally recommend them. Just make sure that if it's your first ever game, you do the prep work that's required and you'll have a great time. Y'all have a good afternoon.